This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 160, entitled Career Brainwashing, the Paternity Strike and China. Description. This flyer talks about the lack of MGTOW/masculist movements, in brackets, or any movements for that matter, in China, so that Chinese men remain manslaves to lazy, parasitic, fluffy wives. When China democratizes, Chinese men will be shocked by Western MGTOW/masculist ideas. Now for the flyer itself. Career Brainwashing, the Paternity Strike and China. I spend my afternoons in one of several local parks or wooded areas studying pure math in my camp chair and the dog. I stare out at the workmen and the people shopping at the hypermarket, whose wooded area is quiet and rustic. I look at these people, especially the young male executives of the hypermarket, and wonder if they are even aware of the cosmic shifts that are now taking place in young Western male minds. China has a government that tries to keep the Chinese people largely unexposed to Western democratic ideas. The Chinese government bans foreign television from entering the homes of the Chinese. It has a monopoly over the content on TV that the Chinese are allowed to see. In brackets, there's no zapping of international TV channels in Chinese living rooms. It censors the internet. YouTube, Facebook, WordPress, etc. are blocked, so you have to use a VPN, that's a virtual private network, and pay for it to get around Chinese censorship. The government pumps its people full of Chinese nationalistic propaganda, trying to persuade the Chinese people that China is a wonderful place with remarkable achievements. But as any cosmopolitan knows, China is to Japan as East Germany was to West Germany, or North Korea is to South Korea. China is a poor dictatorship with a living standard 5 times lower than Japan's. When Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader who took over from Mao, went on a visit to Japan, he was deeply shocked. He saw with his own eyes how much further developed Japan was compared to China's backwardness, that he became determined to bring China into the modern age. So he brought back the marketplace to the Chinese economy, and the country has been booming for nearly 4 decades as a result. China may be a rising economic superpower, but it is still today very much a pygmy nation intellectually. The Chinese are still egloberates, that is, cut off from world culture, living in a narrow Chinese world carved out for them by its government. I look at these young Chinese men, executives in their 20s and 30s, most of them, a few in their 40s, and I think to myself, what are their goals in life? How strongly have they been brainwashed that their primary function is to be manslaves to women, to pay for women to raise kids in a middle-class apartment that he pays for? These young Chinese kids have very narrow horizons, and that is the way their government wants them to be. That reality then makes me think, my God, when the world does finally open up to these young Chinese men, they will get a shock. Their unquestioned, unconscious assumptions about life will be shaken to the core. Young men in the rich, developed, democratic countries are now mostly participating in the paternity strike. In Japan and the US, for example, 70% of young men under 35 refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves, refusing to be manslaves to parasitic, lazy, fluffy wives. Ironically, in China, men have a much better time of it in some ways, because there's no feminist movement in China, for the simple reason that there's no any movement in China. The Chinese government keeps such a tight lid on the Chinese population that they're not allowed to form organizations without permission of the government. There's nothing in the way of real feminism in China, so there have been no Western-style takeovers by fluffy feminists of the divorce courts, so that a Chinese man, when he divorces, will get custody of the kid if the ex-wife is a fluffie with a poor salary for the simple reason that he has the money to pay for the kid. In China, there is a 1 kid maximum per family. Actually, that's no longer true. I'm at living now. That's no longer true. It's now 2 for the whole country. There's a limit of 2. So Chinese divorced fathers do not get financially massacred the way Western fathers do when they divorce, thanks to the gender injustice of the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts in Western countries. But the Chinese are not a creative people. They are ultra-conservative. They are, for example, the only country in the world not to use an alphabet. They use their ancient squiggle writing, where you have to learn thousands of squiggles to be able to write, instead of a hugely simpler and far more intelligent system of using an alphabet with its 24 letters, the way the rest of the world does. China is intellectually sterile. It has no world-class intellectuals pushing original ideas on the world stage. Most Chinese don't even know such a stage exists. They are such egloborates. That is changing now that over 100 million Chinese tourists are travelling internationally each year, bringing back democratic ideas from their experiences in foreign neighbouring countries. China has won a pathetic 1 Science Nobel Prize. And that was to a woman, which makes me deeply suspicious. It was more for PC reasons than merit, anyway, because in the West only 1% of Science Nobel Prizes have been won by women. It is indeed effectively intellectually sterile. As a result of this sterility, Chinese males are powerfully brainwashed that their mission in life is to become a manslave to Chinese fluffies, to pay her to raise her kids. Since there are no organizations in China to speak of, there's no MGTOW nor Masculist movement in China, so Chinese men remain stuck in the manslavery role. There are some young Chinese men who bother to pay for a VPN, virtual private network, but they are expensive for a Chinese salary, since they're mostly Western with Western prices. With a VPN, they can go round the censorship of the internet by the Chinese government and be exposed to Western, that is, global, ideas. They can participate in the comments section of YouTube videos made by Westerners expressing their ideas and opinions on the world stage, but there are very few of them. But experience in 100 other countries over the past half-century has shown that democratization is an inherent part of modernization. So as China continues to get richer and more Chinese travel to democratic countries, they will be influenced by what they see and push for freedom of speech and the right to vote out ineffective political leaders. When that happens, probably in a decade or so, to China, young Chinese men will be in for a shock as they learn that Western men see them as manslaves who need to have their men's lib consciousness raised, made aware of alternative lifestyles for men, where they can focus on themselves and not be brainwashed that their function in life is to pay for women to have her kids in his house. So jump a few decades into the future, into a democratic China that has lost its egloboracy, where ideas flow over China as freely as they do now in the 130 democracies in the world that have freedom of speech. Chinese men will then be influenced by the MGTOW/Masculist ideas, and millions of them will join the paternity strike. They will learn that research has shown that the happiest couples are childless, and that the unhappiest couples have teenage kids. Since the teen age is half of childhood, why have kids at all, if they're only going to lower your happiness quotient? So it won't be difficult to imagine that China's birth rate will fall to Japan's and Germany's, etc. That is, to about 1.3 kids per woman, or less. And China's population starts plummeting like the rest of the developed world. The Chinese government, now democratically elected by the Chinese, will then, like other governments, be thinking hard about how to encourage the population, and particularly MGTOW/Masculist influenced men, to have more babies. Even in the West today, the tectonic shift in gender role attitudes by men has not really yet made itself felt in the wider population, and with the gender politicians. Only in Japan have the herbivores, that's Japan's MGTOWs, made mainstream news. Governments can tax single men, in brackets, MGTOW/Masculist, heavily to pay for subsidies to be given to single mothers. But if these taxes become too heavy, then MGTOW/Masculist, being single, can simply vote with their feet by moving to another country with much cheaper taxes and cost of living, where their savings will have a higher purchasing power. There's not a lot governments can do to encourage people to have more kids. It's only a question of time before the human population really begins to fall to a half of its current value, then a tenth, then a hundredth, etc. Of course, the gender laws will be made men fair to encourage men to be fathers, but probably even such measures will not be enough. Once millions, billions of men have had a real taste of living for themselves, not being manslaves to bloody fluffy parasites, then they may decide to stick with a lifestyle that allows them to do what they love, and not what the manslaving role dictates them to do. In time, as the population falls, there will be a self-selection effect that starts working. Namely, those men who prefer to not have kids will be selected out of the population, leaving men who do want kids, since they will be the sons of fathers who did want kids. But I imagine that such a population will be a lot smaller than today's world figure. It could be even less than 100 million. The more I think about the longer-term consequences of the rise of the MGTOW/masculist movements, the more enormous I see their consequences for humanity, particularly regarding the paternity strike and its impact on the world population size. I doubt we will wipe ourselves out, but I do see a hefty reduction in our human numbers. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel name de GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers.